Players gather to cast powerful spells, some of the oldest and most powerful in the history of Magic the Gathering. Mana Crypt, Tinker, Into the One Ring, and many others. Battling head-to-head in brutal combat, they all have one thing in common: to uphold their legacy and the search for eternal glory.
The Eternal Glory podcast is brought to you by the minds behind BoshNRoll on YouTube, ThrabenU University, and theepicstorm.com. This episode is sponsored by 3-for-1 Trading and Sparks Law Practice.
Hello, and welcome to episode 127 of the Eternal Glory podcast. Griefs gotta go. We've already recorded 30 minutes of introduction and banter for the week, available in our supporter-exclusive pre-show. Check out patreon.com/eternalglory to gain access, or join as a YouTube member for the same content on YouTube instead. As always, I'm Phil Gallagher, aka ThrabenU.
I am Brian Coval, aka BoshNRoll.
And I am Bryant Cook of the Epic Storm.
Make sure to join that Patreon or YouTube membership, get that pre-show. I won a Black Lotus last weekend at the NYSE Open. I tell some stories from that. And there is some complaining about internet weirdos, as normal. If you want to hear our drama about internet weirdos, get in there.
Now, this episode is brought to you by Sparks Law, a business transactional law firm owned by Eternal Magic community member Jonathan Sparks. If you're an entrepreneur, business owner, or gig worker looking to start your own company, Sparks Law can help with partnership agreements, contract reviews, intellectual property protection, or other business legal questions. If you want to shape up your business strategy with a fellow Eternal gamer, reach out via email to jsparks, that's JSPARKS @sparkslawpractice.com, or call 470-268-5234. 3-for-1 Trading is one of Europe's leading Magic the Gathering traders. Their online shop has a fantastic selection of high-end Magic cards, especially for vintage, legacy, and old-school players. You can find them at shop.3for1trading.com or visit their booth at major events. They run weekly sales, and new, individually scanned high-end cards are added every Wednesday. Use code ETERNALGLORY to get our community-exclusive offer of free worldwide shipping on your first order over $500 and experience their world-class customer service and exact grading for yourself.
And if you'd like to advertise to over 10,000 plus Eternal gamers every single episode, reach out to us. We're always accepting new sponsors. Gentlemen, we do have a companion to your question from Garrett Yaki, aka Dragon Day Dragon, and I'll read the first one. At what point do we start playing Gut Shot to stop the turn 1 Necro Dominance decks? Garrett, good question. I receive it a lot. The honest answer is that it's a terrible suggestion because it doesn't work.
So, Brian, let me ask you a question. We go to your end step, and your Necro Dominance triggers. I gut shot you.
Okay.
What do you do?
Well, I was at 20 life. Okay, and now I take 1.
Okay.
I'm now at 19 life. I will then pay 18 life, and then I'll draw 18 cards.
Okay, so what would you do if I let you pay the 19 and then gut shot you?
Oh, well, I would probably just Pact to Negation it. Or what I could do instead is I could exile a Simian Spirit Guide, exile an Elvish Spirit Guide, then I cast Manamorphose, and then I play Born Upon a Wind, and then I make you eat a Tendrils of Agony, and then your Grape Shot never resolves.
Okay, so...
Or, I'm sorry, your Gut Shot. I said Grape Shot. Grape Shot, greatest Magic card of all time, but Gut Shot.
Yep, Grape Shot slander. But yeah, so what you're saying is that Gut Shot does not kill Necrodominance players. It just lets them draw 1 less card on their combo turn.
Correct. You get to pay 2 life in exchange for also discarding a card for your hand.
And that 2 life spent is 1 storm. They don't need to kill you with Tendrils.
Correct.
Not that I think that that's the tipping point in Necrodominance decks, but yeah, Dragon Day Dragon, we were a little goofy in our delivery of that answer, but this does not work how you want it to. There is no moment where they have spent 19, but don't have the handful of cards to just go off over the top or easily pact you and ignore it.
So I think what confuses people is that everyone that is as old as us, you're as old as dirt, or at least I am, is used to playing with Necropotence their entire life, where you pay some number of life, and then at the end step, there's a trigger that puts all the cards to your hand. That is not how Necrodominance works. Necrodominance is trigger resolves one thing happens and then you immediately get the cards. So there's no waiting period. So Gut Shot just isn't relevant.
Similarly, you don't get to Pithing Needle Necrodominance, although someone very much told me that that is a thing that I should be doing in my YouTube comments this week.
You could certainly try. You're allowed to name it. The classic judge question of, Judge, can I Pithing Needle Necrodominance?
Yes, you can.
You sure can.
The judge stands there waiting.
Yep. So, yeah, that's the first question. Gutshot is not a good answer to this, but I have great news for you. Things that are great answers to Necrodominance: Force of Will, Force of Negation, Force of Vigor, Spell Pierce if you're on the play, Flusterstorm if you're on the play. This deck is so fragile. I think that it is a really cool, well-designed thing to exist, and kudos to all the Storm experts out there writing like performance algorithms to sample tens of thousands of hands without actually having to play. Like, I think that's really cool that people are out there doing that. But at the end of the day, I think that deck has a higher fail rate and less protection than Oops All Spells, a deck that we already have and play against. It changes the dimensions of what you need to worry about. Like, instead of Graveyard Hate, now you need to worry about permanent removal, like Leyline Binding or Force of Vigor, just Disenchant, whatever, Wear Tear Fame, or is it Tear? Which one kills an enchantment? I think it's Tear.
It's Tear.
Yeah, so you get to beat Graveyard Hate, but you lose to permanent removal. And this is just a perfectly fine deck that exists, and we don't need to do something as wild as Gutshot to answer it.
Plus, I think it has like a 40% win rate in things like challenges. Like, the last time I looked at the number, it was embarrassing. So, like, maybe respect it if you're playing leagues. There's a bunch of like this and Oops out there, but I don't think it's at the top of the metagame.
Since we're talking about Oops, I did record the mono black Oops All Spells deck that had the Grief Reanimate package in there. I almost trophied. That deck felt nuts. Like, it was way better than I expected. If you're out there trying to play Oops, I guess I was wrong at the end of the last episode. Not that the lands casting the spells really mattered, but just all black lands was really nice to have. So if you're not trying to play green and all these other colors, I guess it is an upgrade.
My response to that is you just concede the game when Leyline of the Void happens. That it's so rough.
Well, we're not really here to talk about Oops All Spells. But as far as Necrodominance goes, we also got some comments. I mean, I'm going to spin off and vamp on this a little bit, because in our last episode, we talked about practical experience with MH3. Our last two episodes were the MH3 previews. What do we think cards are going to do? And then our last one was, now that we've played with it for a while, what's it actually doing? And we were all pretty low on Necrodominance. And some of the comments were like, you must have missed that Tony Scapone 5-0 video. It's like, no, we didn't miss it. We've all tried that deck. Tony had a great run. Tony's a very powerful, competent combo player. And I played the deck. I went 2-3. I think it is just like a fine thing to exist. I think it's really annoying when it goes off. I understand losing on turn 0 is frustrating. I don't want to play games like that either. But it is not more powerful than Oops All Spells. It is comparably powerful to Goblin Charbelcher. And these decks exist, and it's fine. Like, we know that deck exists. We knew that deck existed when we made our comments last episode too.
Yeah, there's a lot of those. I also get them a lot on my videos. They're like, Bryant, you keep on saying Necrodominance isn't good, but Tony went 5-0. It's like, trust me, I know Tony. He's a great guy. But yeah, like Brian said, the deck just like, it fails or struggles to get a positive record and things. But if I'm being completely honest, I think the biggest miss in our last episode, I'm not trying to bash ourselves here, is that we were all low to medium on Psychic Frog. And that card has quickly risen in the ranks. I think the biggest thing that it took me to realize what makes it so good is that you have a creature that you can play on turn 2 versus Moonstompy, Phil, cover your ears, and they just lose the game. That's it. They can't Fury it because you just discard a couple cards and make it too big for Fury. It flies over their blockers, and then you draw cards to make it even bigger. Like, you only have to connect like 2, maybe 3 times, and that deck is dead due to Ancient Tomb. So Rescaminator found a way to turn its only bad matchup into an insanely positive matchup thanks to Psychic Frog. Like, MH3 only made Rescaminator better, and it's because of Frog.
Yeah, I don't remember us being low on Frog. I think we were just like, yeah, we'll see what this one does. It seems cool, but it is better than we gave it credit for. The follow-up question to Necrodominance is another one from the same user, Dragon Day Dragon, wants to know what are the best answers we found to Nadu. And for me, my answer to that is you have to identify what kind of Nadu deck you're playing against. Are you playing against a Cephalid Breakfast, Speed, Level, Cavern of Souls on Bird, Green Sun Zenith, Turbo, shove a combo Nadu deck? Or are you playing against Bant Stoneblade that has some Nadus and one Shuko in it? Because those are different things. And you have to understand if you're playing against a combo deck or if you're playing against a blue deck with a value engine in it. And that's how you decide how you're going to fight it. Does Graveyard Hate matter if they're like a breakfast version? It does Dress Down matter if they're a Thassa's Oracle version? Can you just Swords to Plowshare it when it arrives because you're not going to die on the spot? You could probably pick off the Nomad's Encore before the Nadu comes down. Just break down the engine, and that's how I found the best way to fight Nadu, because it doesn't win the game on its own. It at least needs a Shuko to start drawing cards, and every creature that's in play is 2 more cards. If you can control the material on board, then what the Nadu as it hits is not as bad.
Let me preface this by saying I don't think I've beaten Nadu on camera once, but I don't think you are supposed to go deep trying to beat Nadu. I think the tools you probably have in your deck are reasonable, and you just have to figure out how to best use them. Because at the point where you are trying to beat Nadu specifically, you are probably playing cards that are embarrassing by legacy standards, like playing things like a Harsh Mentor or Suppression Field was something that came up in a list that someone recently donated for me to play. I don't know that you should be going that deep. I think you're Disrupting Flutes, Pithing Needles, Traditional Artifact Hate, Swords to Plowshares, Forces, all that stuff is reasonable. And you just have to try to not let the Nadu go wild, because even if it is not a full combo turn, the blue deck drawing 4 to 6 cards is usually enough to cement a win.
I've watched some friends recently play Cephalid Breakfast, and they're in situations where they have the Shuko or the Nomads, and they have Illusionist in hand, and they're like, I think I'm going to play Nadu here. And I'm like, why wouldn't you play the Illusionist? And they're like, well, there's so many fairies running around due to Rescaminator that they're just constantly afraid of going for the win because they can't force a will or silence to stop the fairy macabres. And I was like, if that's the case, if you're just trying to play the fair Nadu plan all the time and not go for the combo kill, why are you playing Cephalid Breakfast? And they're just like, that's a really good question. It's probably just the best Nadu deck. And I wonder if it actually is. If you're that terrified of actually just winning the game, maybe you should be playing Bant Stoneblade.
Yeah, there's a whole spectrum here, both in building and understanding what you're playing against when you see the potential for a Nadu. And there's full combo builds, and there's just some builds kind of treat it like Uro, where I'm doing all sorts of normal things and I just have 2 or 3 of these to draw some cards later. And that affects how you fight against it. But if they don't have creatures to target or don't have a thing that could target their creatures, that's a good place to put your removal before the bird arrives. Also, remember Pyroblast? We used to be a country. That's a card that has sort of faded out because it's not very good versus Scam. But it's good versus Nadu. So consider that.
So I have 2 answers for what is the best answer to Nadu. The first is grief. Just make sure it never hits the table.
Boo.
Right? Like turn 0, you grief them, and then you reanimate, and then you take their second best card.
Boo.
All right, cancel Bryant. Cancel Bryant. He's advocating for grief.
The other answer is Tendrils of Agony. Yeah, nice Nadu. Kill you. Just kill them dead. Who cares about the land they're going to put in play? Murder them.
Yeah, that's also fair. I like that answer better than the first one. Are we ready to move on and complain about that some more?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so let me set up the premise for this episode. We're recording this on Tuesday, June 25th, and yesterday, Monday, June 24th, there was a ban update that many legacy players expected would involve grief leaving our format, and there were no changes to any format. And that's where it was left. So that's the jumping off point. As far as, let's just talk about this a little bit before we start going into our prepared notes. We have been identifying grief on this podcast as a problem for the format, 4, 5, 6 months? It's been a while now that we've had that one on our radar. We have been pretty steadfast that Orcish Bowmaster is, while annoying, a pretty appropriate legacy power level card. I know reasonable people disagree, but that is how we feel. But we do feel like grief is over a line, or at least the package that exists to support grief in this format is over the line somewhere. And we'll talk about specifically where the pressure points are. Like, should grief just go, or has reanimate now overstayed its welcome, and losing the 1 mana way to bring grief back would balance grief while also taking some pressure off of other busted combo decks? We have been anti-grief for a while, and we're gonna just jump into that. I still feel that way.
Yeah, the title's Grief Gotta Go.
Our first grief episode was September 8th, 23.
Yep. That was almost a year ago. That was 9 months ago. Almost 10 months ago, because that was early September. It's now late June. So that was almost 10 months ago that we started talking about grief as potentially an issue.
So I think, at least for this update, let's read what Wizards of the Coast said. We are approaching Legacy similarly to Modern right now. Modern Horizons 3 has brought major changes to the format, and we're seeing how it responds to this release. While the community explores Modern Horizons 3, we continue to monitor the play rate and win rate of Reanimator, as it has surged dramatically in recent months. We intend to take a hard look at Legacy in our next announcement coming in late August. Guys, August, that's 2 months away.
And it is the very end of August, to clarify. It is the 26th.
I don't want to deal with this for 2 more months.
Well, you know what they say, hot girl summer. And if you've looked closely at grief, she is dummy thick on that art. I think the hot girl summer belongs to grief here. And you know what my favorite card from Modern Horizons 3 is? One that's, really shaking up the format. It's called Pitch Trap, where if your opponent exiled a card to cast a spell, this spell is free, and you gain control of target spell. That really flipped around the grief and all the shit we've been dealing with. Wait. I'm getting a note. That card wasn't printed. What the fuck are we supposed to do when we get grief twice on turn 0? Like, what are you talking about? What card in Modern Horizons 3 is shaking up grief? Like, the set's awesome. I love Modern Horizons 3. I really enjoy playing with the new cards. It sucks when they're both in the graveyard on turn 0. Nadu, Necro Dominance, Psychic Frog, all these dope-ass cards, they're in the graveyard. And now Atraxa is killing me. Not fun.
So I did a roundtable a while back where I identified grief as a problem card. And I was like, we should wait until we have the spoilers for Modern Horizons 3. But if nothing shakes this up, it is probably time to start talking about ejecting grief from the format. And spoilers, we have Modern Horizons 3. And the blue-black Reanimator deck just got better due to Psychic Frog that we'll probably talk about more in a minute. It didn't stay the same. It got noticeably better, had a bunch of its weaknesses patched up, and we got to deal with this shit for 2 more months.
If we go back to the March update, because there was a banned and restricted update in March 11th, they say Bowmasters and Grief are big players in the Legacy metagame. They're currently monitoring them as cards that are, ruining long-term net fun. And then they're saying that Grief has popped up more recently due to giving those decks a lean tempo game plan, as well as the ability to go over the top by reanimating more targets like Atraxa Grand Unifier. Historically speaking, Modern Horizons sets have the ability to influence Legacy, so we'll wait to see how the format evolves as it absorbs Modern Horizons 3. So they told us to wait and see what happens with Modern Horizons 3. We're now 3 weeks past Modern Horizons 3 released, and the best deck in the metagame gained Psychic Frog. And it went from, a really good win rate up to a third of the format, if you look at the data. And it's just what are we supposed to do? It's a third of the field now, and its win rate is super high. What are we doing here?
I do think it is totally reasonable, just to bring the temperature down a little bit. I think it is reasonable to wait and see when a set printed with non-rotating formats in mind is released and could completely shake up the ecosystem. The issue with Grief specifically is that it is such a high impact at 0 mana. It happens so quickly, and it usually happens twice, that whatever you would need to print to answer Grief would have to be so extreme to be either more broken than Grief or so useless if your opponent isn't griefing you. I could see, I kind of, goofed a little bit earlier, but I could see some trap where it's Mindbreak Trap, but if your opponent exiled a card to cast a spell this turn, this is free, counter target spell. Like maybe that could exist, but you can't really have that card in your deck if you're not playing against a deck that like pitches things. So it's like the answer would have to be so narrow as to be unplayable, or so extreme, like completely free Veil of Summer, that it would be busted. So like, I don't know. We're already talking about turn 0 interaction. What could be printed in a set like Modern Horizons 3 that would be appropriate for the modern format that could counter Grief?
Well, what gets me is that they said that they would wait until after the release and then reevaluate. They have 3 weeks worth of data. Like, it exists. I don't feel like me being upset is irrational at this point. Like, they had the 3 weeks worth of data. They saw that the best deck's win rate went up. And they're just like, well, we're going to wait a little bit longer just to see if anything changes. But at this point, players aren't showing up to game stores anymore. Legacy challenges aren't firing. Like, the player base is unhappy. And the data shows that there's a significant problem. Part of me wonders if they even took a real look, or if they're just like, MH3 just came out. We'll look next time.
I saw a funny tweet today that is mostly a shit post, but also hit something important, which is, if the take is going to be, the set just came out 2 weeks ago, we don't want to change anything, but the BNR update cadence is they make an announcement 2 weeks after each set comes out, it's a lock. Like, they're in the hooks. Like, the set just came out, we're not going to make any changes. But you only make BNR updates when a set just came out. It's a feedback loop. You have to be willing to make changes with 2 or 3 weeks worth of data if this is when the cadence is going to be. And there's clearly an issue.
So why don't we touch on some data for just a minute here. So as far as win rate for this blue-black Reanimator deck, we are looking at about 54.5%. You've got plus or minus about 1.5% of error according to the challenge data. So it has an extremely high win rate. It is roughly a third of the metagame according to MTG Goldfish, depending on what exactly you loop together. And it is 10% of the challenge metagame, or maybe 13 or 14 if you lump together the blue-black Scam and the blue-black Reanimator deck lists that kind of exist in the same general space.
And if you're at home listening and you're not someone that typically plays on Magic Online, the Goldfish metagame data, which Phil said is roughly a third, that counts Dimir Scam, it counts Salte Scam, and Rescaminator as one deck. That it's roughly 33% of the field. So that counts league data and challenge data, where the challenge data, as it sounds, is only those Sunday, Saturday, whatever. I guess we have like 4 or 5 challenges a week now, but it is those players playing in the legacy challenges. And those people are the most enfranchised legacy players that exist. They're playing through thick and thin. Those people are saying, hey, I know the format's bad, but this is my favorite format. I'm going to play 3 challenges a week or whatever. And those people are dedicated. But a lot of them have fallen off. And I believe that is why we're seeing it being slightly lower, because those are the people that are just waiting it out at this point, where a lot of other people have decided to go play other games or other formats or other things at the moment.
Yeah, the reception to this BNR update was extremely negative. Like, I am taking the next 2 months off of legacy levels of negative, including from highly enfranchised brewers. So one that stood out to me was like Killabee, who has worked on a lot of really neat, intricate, off-the-wall combo decks. And they were like, yeah, no, I think I'm just going to do other things for a while.
Yeah, and Killabee is one of the people who shows up and plays the weekend challenges. He hosts a legacy podcast. Like, that is a enfranchised legacy player. And if folks like him are out, then that's really tough on the format. We're not talking about legacy F&M going from 30 people to 15 because people would rather go see a movie or hang out with their friends on Friday night. We're talking about the ride or dies here, starting to back off a little bit. And I personally don't feel that way, but I am doing something different than someone like Akilla B is. There are other people who want to build a deck and play very well and win. And while those things are important to me, I am, and all 3 of us are in our daily interaction with Legacy, just trying different stuff, making fun videos, showcasing what the format can be about. But even in that endeavor right now, I'll be doing something fun, and 1 or 2 rounds of my 5-round video, I just get grief, reanimate griefed. The match is over. Okay. So we kind of functionally get 3 rounds of feature of the cool deck instead of 5, because the games are just over so fast. And there's nothing that a brew can do to keep up, because the format, the top tier of the format, is struggling to keep up. So what's a brew going to do?
And I think the worst thing is that you sometimes feel like you have a chance. Like in the Ragavan, Dreadhorde Arcanist era, you just got run over. In the Oko Uro era, your stuff was just fully invalidated. In this current era, sometimes you feel like you have a chance and you're just like, yeah, I can just top deck something to deal with this grief. And then you remember that they have an entire rest of their deck and all the other cards that remain in their hand. And, there's Psychic Frogs coming later. There is Atraxa coming later. There's Force of Will, Daze to back these up. There's another Grief backing this up. There's another Reanimate to bring it back after you answer it. So you sometimes feel like you're playing a game of Magic, when in reality, you've had 2 holes punched in your early game plan and your opponent can sculpt around it from there.
Gentlemen, I think that this is a really good point to mention something. Phil, you just mentioned 5 or 6 cards that are all within the Dimir Scaminator shell. A notable card you did not say, Orcish Bowmasters. I just want to point that out there. The Scam decks for Scaminator, whatever you like to call them these days, they've all cut Orcish Bowmasters for the most part. Some of them are playing them in the sideboard, but for the most part, they're out of the main deck. And if you look at Grixis Delver these days, Orcish Bowmasters is gone. If you look back a year or so, people were screaming, Orcish Bowmasters has got to go. I like drawing cards. I hate Bowmasters. I want to draw cards. A lot of that has died down. And now everyone's looking at Grief. As the format adapts and evolves and Bowmasters is trending off, Grief just keeps on going up and up and up. And I just think it's important to mention, for those that might not be playing still because they're taking a break or whatever, that Orcish Bowmasters, well and fun to some, isn't really as wide played as some may think it is.
And part of that is the context of Bowmaster isn't that good in the Scam mirror, because the card advantage comes from things like Reanimate and Atraxa, or the 2 1/1s and the ping don't matter, or even just the ability to brainstorm straight into an onboard Bowmaster and come up with an Archon of Cruelty on the other side. It just outmuscles it. Rescaminator was pivoting off of Bowmaster onto main deck Dothy Voidwalker to solve the mirror before we even had Psychic Frog. So Bowmaster is falling off in a big way. And if Grief gets banned and decks slow down back into Beanstalk style strategies that we were seeing 6 months ago, you'll probably see Bowmaster come back up. It's not like the card has been invalidated. It's always lurking under the surface, and it's still, a 2 of in some lists or in the sideboard, like Brian said, but it doesn't attack the parts of the format that are important right now. And something that Phil was just saying, which is how Scam makes you feel like you're playing a game of Magic. We talked about this a little bit before we started recording, and how in the data, it's like one number is attributed to Rescaminator, and then the number gets bigger if we count Sultai Scam and just Dimir Scam without the Reanimator package. And I personally find that to be a line for me, where I do think Dimir Scam is kind of cool and fun. I do think Sultai Scam is kind of cool and fun. What I don't like is the fluid ability of Rescaminator to have that Grief Scam package that you can build Dimir or Sultai or even, Mardu or Black-White Scam around, and then also whip an Atraxa at you, immediately following it up. Like, I do actually think spending 2 cards to take 1 card off of a Grief is a pretty fair deal on its surface. And even reanimating it, it's a 3 for 3. They've spent the black card, the Grief, and the Reanimate to take 2 cards out of your hand, and then you will need a removal spell for the Grief eventually. So it's 3 for 3. It's fair, but what the Legacy card pool is capable of with Entomb Reanimate, and Reanimate being the thing that ties the whole room together, compared to modern Scam, where they need like Undying Evil or Not Dead After All, that has to target a creature that's on its way to the graveyard to get the scam. Like, you can't just scam on turn 0 and then draw Reanimate on turn 3 and still get your grief back in the modern card pool. You can't have Atraxa in your hand or graveyard and Not Dead After All it, and it comes back. It's just asking the deck to do two totally different things. And somewhere in that specifically Rescaminator package is where I become frustrated. What do you guys think about the difference?
A lot of people right now are talking about Reanimate as well. But to me, and I could be wrong, but if I'm Wizards of the Coast, and I'm not on a legacy format panel or anything like that, but if I'm Wizards of the Coast, Reanimate to me is one of those pillars of the format up there with Ways and Daceland. It is a card that defines legacy. And if you decide that Reanimate at 1 mana is too good and decide to ban it, I will be deeply shocked. Like if Wizard says Reanimate spell should start at 2, and then you're left with Animate Dead and Exhume and stuff like that, I'd be floored. But I don't see that as like something that they're willing to do, because that erases the history of Legacy Reanimator for, 20 plus years of being able to cast Reanimate. I don't think that they're going to make that move. I think instead they're just going to say, yeah, grief is a problem, we'll remove it. But a lot of people are just like, I think that Troll of Khazad-dûm is the problem because it fixes the mana with Wasteland and stuff like that. And then like reanimates the Troll. Or some people are saying, well, what if we just ban Entomb again? But that deck doesn't even need Entomb. You have Grief Reanimate is the problem, plus Troll of Khazad-dûm. And now you have Psychic Frog to discard thick creatures from your hand. Like, part of me's not even convinced Entomb is like the top 3 card that should be banned. It's like pretty far down the list.
Yeah, I think that anyone saying anything other than Grief or Reanimate as the target is trying to be too clever. Like, clearly the two issues here are that Grief disrupts your opponent for free and Reanimate brings it back. That's the core issue. Reanimate also brings back the Atraxa. I think Entomb does enough cool things in the format. Like, there are decks that Entomb for life for the Loam, like Loam Pox decks, or decks that Entomb Narcomoeba and put a creature to play.
World Gorger Dragon.
Yeah, World Gorger Dragon. There are cool things you could do with Entomb that aren't bullshit. And I mostly agree with you that Reanimate is one of those cool things that exists in Legacy but cannot exist in Modern. Like, they had to make Reanimate cost 2 and it can only target non-legendary creatures and the creature comes in with -1/-1. That's the best you get in Modern. They had to nerf it 3 different ways. I do think Reanimate is one of those cool Legacy cards that I would prefer to see stay legal. But I think we also have to be honest that it is Grief or it is Reanimate if something has to be taken out of this deck to bring it back into the normal range. Like, if Reanimating Grief costs 2 minimum, that completely changes the speed of this deck.
So I think an important thing to think about here is, like, does just removing Grief from the format actually knock this deck or something very similar to it out of being in its S tier position? Because I have seen a lot of Twitter discourse where people are like, yeah, I think if we remove Grief, the deck is still just really fucking good, because the whole Tempo, Daze, Reanimate, Psychic Frog shell that is popping up now is incredibly powerful. It will lose a lot of redundancy. It will lose some early game combo interaction, but, they can pick up Force of Negations out of the sideboard if they need more early interaction versus combo. So I don't know, maybe.
I think the answer to that question of is Grief enough to take this deck down is a firm yes. Yes, you can still build Blue-Black Reanimator. Yes, you could still build a big Reanimator package into Blue-Black Scam. But the difference between relying on a Thoughtseize to clear the way or a Grief to clear the way is an entire turn. That is your opponent's ability to get Spell Pierce or Flusterstorm or Veil of Summer or something online before your thing comes back. Like, the ability to Grief you. Like, I've played a bunch of Rescaminator, and I frequently Grief before I even make my land drop. I'm just like, what are you doing over there? And then I decide everything based on that. If I see that they're on a Wasteland draw, I might fetch for Basic Swamp, where if I didn't know that, I fetch Underground Sea, I have to spend a turn Thoughtseizing them. Now I'm open to Wasteland. My deck has a low land count. Maybe that's enough to knock me off kilter. 0 is so much less than 1, just like 1 is so much less than 2. And yes, I think that knocking Grief back, we might still have some sort of tempo reanimator deck, but those have always existed. I released a video on my channel, I think 14 months ago, called Delver Reanimator. It was literally this, except we hadn't figured out that Grief belongs in the shell yet. But it was just, Delver, Daze, Wasteland with Entomb Reanimate in there and a bunch of Thoughtseizes and stuff. And I was doing that over a year ago. And Grief is the difference between that deck being like a fun thing that was a cool video versus breaking the format.
Gentlemen, I watched Daily MTG today, and if you're unaware, it is hosted by Blake Rasmussen. I don't know if that's actually how you pronounce his last name.
Rasmussen.
There we go. And Andrew Brown, who is known as Merc Lurker. And they talk about why they made these changes, and I took some notes. So we're going to discuss some of those. So the big takeaway is Modern Horizons 3 just released, and they wanted to wait a little bit longer to see if the legacy metagame could adapt. And we've talked about that a little bit at this point. And how long is too long? Did it have enough time? That sort of stuff. What would your preferred window to be? If you weren't willing to make changes at 2 weeks, how long of a wait do you think it should be?
So I think, generally speaking, it is responsible to wait for like a month or something after a set releases to make changes. I think that is perfectly fine. However, given the context of current Legacy, where like we have known Grief as this problem card for quite some time, nothing's changing in the next 2 months. Every like active Legacy player right now is like, okay, so Grief gets banned in August. Like we are in the waiting room for it. Like we know it is happening. It is just when.
Yeah, my window changes depending on how new the problem is. Like if Modern Horizons 3 created the problem, like if Necrodominance was actually busted and shifting the metagame, I think 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever it's been, is not necessarily long enough to react to that. But when we've had a problem, and like we talked about before, we released an episode talking about how good Grief is and how it might be a problem 10 months ago. And Modern Horizons 3 offered us no cards that combat Grief. Like, what are we waiting for at that point? I think that's a different thing than a new card causing a problem. We're talking about a pretty old problem at this point that was A, not solved, and B, probably buffed by MH3.
Also, just before someone gets in at us and points out that Vexing Bauble stops Grief, like, you only go first half the time.
Yeah, not if it's in your graveyard, and they're a Force of Will deck. And guess what? If you Vexing Bauble on turn 1 to stop them from griefing you, they can now Entomb Reanimate and not care about Force of Will or Surgical Extraction. Good job. You solved it.
Something interesting that I found watching this daily MTG is they mentioned that Grief has an unfun play pattern. Getting griefed, taking the Graveyard Hate spell, and then bringing back Grief on the same turn using Reanimate is not a fun experience. Having your top 2 cards in your hand just discarded. A double Thoughtseize on the first turn is not fun. And if you're trying to build a deck to not lose the Grief, you're putting a lot of the same effects in your deck. So that way you'll have the ability to still fight Grief, which leads to boring play patterns. Like, you don't want to be in a spot where you're just casting the same type of spells over and over again, because it's just not fun for people. And speaking of cards that aren't fun, Mind Twist is banned for not being fun. Just throwing that out there. So if you've already decided that getting half your hand discarded isn't fun, just ban the other card that also allows it.
I would honestly rather play against Mind Twist in Legacy than Grief and Reanimate together as a package at this point.
Same.
We've talked about it a few times. I think Mind Twist could come off the ban list and barely see play. I think that is one of the easy ones. That and Earthcraft, just waiting. It's insulting that they're still banned. Our format can handle it. But yeah, Grief is a more powerful card and easier to set up than Mind Twist is.
One of the things that really upset me is I've been looking forward to SCG Baltimore because as a dad, I can't get out that much and I can only go to a certain number of Legacy events per year. And not to mention the fact that Legacy gets so few events per year anyway. SCG Baltimore is just around the corner. It's about 3 or 4 weeks from this recording. And there's 2 Legacy events. There's one on Friday afternoon and then there's a 5K on Sunday. I've been looking forward to this event. During this daily MTG, they said, there's no major events coming up for Legacy anyway. What? There's like 3, maybe 4 Legacy events we're allowed to play a year, and just like this one doesn't count. Like SCG, it just doesn't matter, I guess. It's not Eternal Weekend.
The economy of scale that they're operating on here is really confusing because like Legacy is a qualifier format for the Mox. The Mox is a Pro Tour adjacent event. It qualifies for the Pro Tour. It has the prestige and cash payout of a Pro Tour. That doesn't matter. Like the feeders to that aren't major. I understand there's not 1,000 players enrolled in them, but they have high stakes attached to them. And yeah, these SCG 5 and 10Ks that run, the Buffalo Chicken Tip opens. We can play Legacy 5 or 10Ks a couple times a month if we want to. The Oklahoma Land Run is coming up. It's actually running against SCG Baltimore. That's a huge Legacy tournament for Power 9 happening in Oklahoma the same day as SCG Baltimore. I think Wizards just doesn't know that these things are happening.
How about the Gen Con Secret Lair Showdown, which is going to have a total prize pool at market value of over $100,000. It's a good thing there's no impactful Legacy events happening. I'm a little frustrated about this point in particular.
Yeah, and if you need Eternal Weekend level events to make decisions about Legacy, give us more of them, Wizards of the Coast. Fire it twice a year. Give us summer and winter Eternal Weekend. Send it. If that's what you need, support it. Let it happen. Eternal Weekend last year, the American one, busted its cap multiple times. They had to get a bigger room and put out more tables to accommodate all the players who wanted to show up and play high stakes Legacy. Let us do that. If you're not going to respect the DIY stuff, the Buffalo Chickens and the Oklahoma Land Runs out there.
There's also the NRG stuff. I forgot about their team trios. That's at the end of August, right before the new band window. That's a 10K.
Yep.
Only a third of it is in Legacy, so maybe that one doesn't count as an event. But, Yeah,
it counts as a 3.3K for Legacy, and that's too small.
I won't lie, when they said that, I got a little frustrated just because I was like, it's just not true. And it made me believe that Blake and Andrew did not do the research on this one. It felt like it was just an off-the-cuff answer where they hadn't actually thought about if there was anything coming up. They're just like, Eternal Weekend is the only thing that matters. And it just feels so disheartening to hear that all these other events don't matter, just because there are a lot of grassroots people out there trying to make Legacy a better place. So that brings me to the next point, which is paper results way more than Magic Online results. And I thought that was really interesting to hear, especially considering we get so few paper events per year. That was a question that was asked in chat that they responded to. What do you two think about paper results weighing more than Magic Online results?
I think that's a really weird take. I don't know what value that could provide, because paper moves slower than MTGO, not faster. And when we're talking about crunching numbers and finding unacceptable win rates and stuff, we want tens of thousands of matches, not a 600-person event and, the variance of pairings and whatever that leads to a single winner on that one day. A week of Moto Leagues show us more than a Grand Prix would have. And we're not getting Grand Prix. So I just don't understand that at all. I guess maybe this could be part of the point. Like if they want to see how Rescaminator lines up against Johnny Homebrew of old man Pox, who's just been playing mono black Pox since 1995. And that's what he likes. And he shows up to the Grand Prix or the SCG Con because it's local and that's what he's got. Do they need to see the numbers of that person being 0% versus Rescaminator? I don't know. That's just a really weird take to me. I don't get it.
So beyond that, there are also these comments about Legacy is a community-driven format. We want to be responsive to community sentiment. And I do not feel like no changes is responsive to community sentiment right now in any capacity, especially given the incredible negative reaction to the announcement and poor reception of the follow-up Q&A that we got. There is not an appropriate response here.
So there is one thing that we haven't talked about yet that I want to make sure we at least give the plausible deniability of credit for. If Wizards of the Coast is actually thinking about this a lot and they have way more numbers and data to work off of than we do, and they know what their measures are for that data, and they're thinking about next order consequences. They might not be acting on grief now because they know if the grief dam breaks, there's one or two other cards that will need to go too. I don't know if that's true, but I'm just, putting it out there. Like, I think about the standard ban where they banned all the energy shit out of the Kaladesh sets. And then they also banned Rampaging Ferostodon in that same update because they realized with energy out, mono red would be unbeatable. And just that kind of nuance of understanding where the format would go after they kill the obvious problem. They might be taking their time to really marinate and clean up everything with one move. But also, I don't know that that's the case. And I play a lot of Legacy. I don't think there is something just waiting in the wings that grief is keeping in check, except fun.
I also don't believe that Wizards of the Coast has historically done that. Think about the counterbalance ban. Or I'm sorry, the Sensi's Divining Top ban. And to me, it was a counterbalance ban. I'm just throwing that out there. But
to most of us, it was.
But everyone knew at that time that Deathrite Shaman was going to be a problem. They were like, top and Deathrite, top and Deathrite, top and Deathrite. We only received top. And then we had to wait like 2 more years before Deathrite Shaman left. So I don't think that they're that deep in the weeds. That's my own personal opinion. But there is something really interesting that came out of the stream today. And Andrew Brown was asked if they have people on the in-house team that works on play and development or whatever it's called that play Legacy.
Play design.
There we go. Play design. And Andrew Brown said they have a couple people that are dedicated to Legacy or play a lot of Legacy. And Andrew Brown said that the person that plays the most Legacy said that they should probably ban grief. So they had the input of their in-house Legacy specialist, and then they had the community sentiment of ban grief, and they chose to not ban grief yesterday. And I wonder, what is the rationale? We didn't really get a reason why other than Modern Horizons 3 just released. There's been some Reddit threads about, well, maybe Wizards just needs to sell more griefs out of their mythic slot of Modern Horizons 3 packs. I honestly don't believe that's it. Because I remember when they banned Seething Song, it was like in packs at that time. Granted, it wasn't a chase mythic, but they've banned cards that are still in packs before.
Yeah, and this is a special sheet reprint. It's not like Grief was marketed as one of the big sellers of the set. It's just you could get retro border Griefs now in some packs, like collector packs or whatever. I don't think that's it. Like MH3, I actually didn't even know the pitch elementals were getting that treatment until packs were already being opened, and I just saw one on TCG Player. There was no marketing that I was aware of and the triumphant return of the MH2 elementals. They're back and they look great. I didn't see anything like that. So I do think there is a lot in ban decisions to be made around new set chase cards. Like in Modern, if something needs to be done about Nadu, they're going to hit Shuko. They're going to hit the 20-year-old uncommon, not the brand new rare from their marquee release for the format. I just think that makes sense to me. But yeah, I don't think Grief being re-released as retro border is what's keeping them from banning it. I think they actually are just taking a slow hand to make sure they don't act too quickly while Modern Horizons 3 is still potentially shaking out. And if you are working on draft and standard and modern, and Legacy is on the back burner, which it is, and we understand that, and we know that the resources available inside Wizards of the Coast cannot test all Legacy decks forever. We know we're back here, but if 2 months, to us, the idea of having a miserable summer playing Legacy is pretty devastating. But to Wizards of the Coast to have to manage this format for as long as Magic the Gathering exists, 2 months is not that long to make sure they get it right. So that's probably more likely what's going on over there.
So sometimes when ban discourse is necessary, there's some people who are very loudly saying oh, you just need to adapt to it. You just need to adapt to it. Well, people have tried. It didn't go well. And then the deck got better. And I cannot emphasize enough how much better Psychic Frog has made these decks. This was not something we've talked about a lot on the podcast. We put our efforts elsewhere. And I want to talk about some of the things that Psychic Frog does. So the deck had a woefully low force of will count, as the deck was trying to fit in like Bowmasters or maybe Dalthy Voidwalker. And now it just gets to play Psychic Frog. So its force of will count is back where it needs to be. You had awkwardness in drawing large creatures to hand. Psychic Frog gets them in the right zone. Sometimes you draw cards that aren't good anymore. Redundant Entombs, redundant reanimates that don't have a target, dazes that your opponent can now play around. Psychic Frog gives them an outlet. You know what else Psychic Frog is good at? The Mirror. Because you can use Psychic Frog's ability to its ability to gain flying to remove 3 cards from your graveyard. So your opponent doesn't get to reanimate your shit. Also, it's an additional card draw body to make up for an aggressive use of early resources like Daze and Grief. And it's a large body that can outpace opposing fair creature decks while also invalidating red removal. There's my love letter. Card's fucking great.
Yeah, we were playing Whale of the Forgotten in the early builds of Rescaminator just to have a card that's both blue and black and has some text on it. And Psychic Frog is blue and black and has a lot of text on it.
Another thing that Psychic Frog does is that graveyard hate just becomes less relevant. Between Dalthy Voidwalker and Psychic Frog, like traditionally in the past, let's go back a couple of years. You want to beat Reanimator? What's the first card you're putting in your sideboard? Leyline of the Void. Current Rescaminator decks, they're just like, yeah, whatever. I'll play a turn 2 Frog. I'll cast Grief on turn 4. I'll play Dalthy Voidwalker. It's so easy for this deck to pivot, and it's kind of unbelievable because people are still living like it's 3 years ago, where a Leyline of the Void shuts them off, and it's just a mild inconvenience these days.
And even if you have graveyard hate, it's not necessarily good, right? So like Surgical Extraction, let's use that as an example. Surgical is just taken by Grief, and then your opponent reanimates Grief. That didn't do anything. If you have the Leyline, like you were just talking about, you could just hard cast the Grief later on, and Reanimate still works on every graveyard. Animate Dead works on every graveyard. So they can Grief you, reanimate your Caves of Chaos Adventurer or whatever medium-sized threat that you have in your deck, and they can move on with their life. And if you want to play the hard-hitting graveyard hate, that usually comes in at 2 mana. And if people are out there jamming Oops All Spells and other incredibly fast combo decks like that, trying to go under these decks, then that is probably just too slow.
So you saying that reminded me, a couple minutes ago, I said, I don't think there's any busted deck that Grief is holding back. I forgot about Initiative. Remember Eternal Weekend when Initiative was the best deck? And now it is completely unplayable. I've not seen an Initiative creature in play in months. That is Grief's doing. It is too easy to just be the Initiative deck. And I personally hate Initiative. I think Stompy in general sucks ass. And when their creatures continue to impact the board long after you've killed them is really obnoxious for honest control wizards. But I understand the texture of that existing in the metagame being good for deck diversity. And that just being completely gone because it's too devastating to have your Initiative creature griefed and reanimated on turn 1 is a serious problem.
I think more generally here, it's important to note that I think just the Chalice of the Void decks in general are quite bad now. Like, Chalice doesn't stop Animate Dead. Chalice doesn't stop Troll going to Graveyard. Chalice does not stop Psychic Frog. Like, I have switched to just playing Vexing Bauble in the main deck of so many of my Stompy decks right now, just like completely dropping Chalice. And that is a very strong statement on the metagame, I think.
Gentlemen, I've been saving this bullet for last, and I think it's a great way to wrap up the episode. Andrew Brown was asked, is Wizards currently discussing or thinking about a legacy format panel? And their answer was they've not discussed it and they're not seeing it. They don't even see it happening in the future. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think there should be a one? Who do you think should be on it? Do you want one at all? All this good stuff. What are your thoughts? Tell me.
I am so happy to hear that answer. We talked about this on the pod. We did an episode whenever the Pauper format panel was formed. Was that 2 years ago? I don't even know how long that's been going. But when the Pauper format panel was formed, obviously legacy players were like, hey, we're kind of a maligned, non-rotating format that's mostly casual. How about us? And all 3 of us said, that's a terrible idea. And I still feel that way. I want Wizards of the Coast managing my format, not Legacy players. If they made a panel and I was asked to serve, I would not. And I think anyone who stood up and said, I would like to be on this panel should be immediately disqualified, because I don't know, like, it's the same thing with politics. Like, that any person who would choose to run for elected office is automatically mentally ill. And people who are smart enough to do the work are also smart enough to stay out of politics. And there's just no connective point where a person who wants to do this job would be good at it. So no thanks. Legacy, leave it in the hands of the professionals, even if we occasionally have to railroad them on a live Twitch broadcast to address Legacy ban list updates.
Content creators as is receive a relatively large amount of minor harassment and such online. If you then tie their identity to a Legacy banned list, where a banned list decision could literally impact someone's deck by, degrees of thousands of dollars, that is setting up the people on those panels to potentially be in some degree of real danger beyond just the friendly jabs and such. The folks on the Pauper format panel already catch enough shit. Now imagine if that is, your $1,000 foil Japanese insert banned card getting the axe.
Phil, I'm just going to say it. I own 4 Japanese foil griefs. I'd dance if they were banned tomorrow. I'd be so thrilled. But I'm with the two of you. I don't think that there should be a Legacy format panel. I think it's a terrible idea. And one of the things is you need people from all different regions and backgrounds and all this stuff. And I started in my head mentally trying to create who I'd want on this imaginary panel, and I couldn't do it. There was very few people I wanted on there, or that I said, hey, I think they'd be great for this role. And ultimately, that means that Wizards of the Coast should just keep on doing what they're doing. They've created a format that I already love. I just wish that, they'd listen to us, a little bit more often.
Yeah, and to jump on Phil's point about content creators getting shit all the time, we have been accused of impacting Legacy ban lists in the past. We have been, people were mad at us when, Expressive Iteration got banned. Not like normal people. These are obviously freaks, but the freaks are out there. And even a few episodes ago, when we were kind of we're talking about grief today, we don't want to talk about Bowmaster, much like this episode, we just kind of dismissed Bowmaster because it wasn't the topic. I had 2 people upset at me in my own Patreon. These are people who pay to be part of my empire here, not even randos. One of them was you guys dismissing Bowmaster so outright is dangerous, because if Wizards listens to your podcast, then the people who don't want Bowmaster in the format are screwed because of your opinions. And someone else was much meaner about that and ended up freaking out and leaving the Patreon just because we said we're not worried about Bowmaster. And we have no sway. We're not Wizards of the Coast. Maybe they listen to this pod, maybe they don't, but they have numbers and they're going to do what they're going to do. It's wild. And we're already dealing with that when we have no actual power. So I don't know, signing up for a Legacy format panel, in power to the Pauper format panel, and the work they do, but no thank you.
All right. Can I throw one final punch before we call it a day?
Let it rain.
All right. So I pulled up the MTG most played cards in Legacy list. The top 10 is just cards in Blue-Black Reanimator. If I look at the most played creatures in Legacy, it is just Blue-Black Reanimator, and then Simian Spirit Guide at number 10. So
sounds healthy to me.
Great format diversity, folks. See you in August when we get to have, another conversation about this, hopefully with grief in the rearview mirror.